Hello, everyone, and welcome to Is the Engagement Survey Dead webinar. My name is Laura Belyea, and I will be your moderator extraordinaire today. So I'm the Chief Operations Officer here at Talivest, and I work really closely with our customers and our product team, as well as our data scientists. At Talivest, we take a very unique approach to employee engagement, where we use a really holistic approach to listening to your employees through different channels such as surveys, sentiment analysis, as well as employee net promoter score to really help you understand your employee engagement. So we measure engagement throughout the employee lifecycle from onboarding right through to exit. Armed with such insights, our organization, our customers can detect really early signs of engagement and they can take action on those. So in my role, I get to do lots of research and I get to talk to a lot of people about employee engagement. And I often hear how organizations are increasingly using real-time analytics and recommendations in other areas like consumer and business technologies. So this seems to have really raised some concerns that the feedback gathered through the more traditional engagement surveys is not frequent enough to provide a complete and current perspective. So this is why we decided to host this webinar today on this very hot topic. So I'd like to welcome all of our guests joining us from so many amazing different companies. As you can see, we've had a great response to the webinar today, which is really exciting. And again, really validates this is a really hot topic at the moment. So nice to virtually meet everyone, and you are very welcome. And I'd like to really thank, we had so many of our guests submit questions ahead of time. And what this did is this really helped us form the basis of our discussions today. So I would like to now introduce our amazing panel. So we have Professor Nafu, who is the Associate Professor in Human Resources and the Director of the Masters in Human Resource Management at Trinity Business School. Na's research, she's been published in leading journals and has won many prestigious awards. So really happy to have her today to give her insights. Next, we have Neil Millen. Neil is a Senior Business Partner at Intercom for the product teams, and his teams span across San Francisco, Dublin, and London. I actually think Neil is in London today. And Neil previously worked at companies like Google, Vodafone, and O2. And last but not least, we have Edel Colgan, who is the head of HR for Paddy Power Betfair, where she partners with Betfair product marketing leadership teams. And Edel previously worked both within consulting for companies like Deloitte, and then she worked formerly for Telefonica as well. Okay, so today's agenda. So we are going to be having a look at employee engagement, past, present, and the future. We hopefully will answer the questions that you submitted to us. And then at the end of this webinar, you will have some top takeaways that you'll be able to bring back to your organization. So before we get started, now bear with me here technically, I hope I'm able to do this. We wanted to do a very quick poll. So you should see a poll pop up on your screen. There we go. And what we are really interested in understanding is how often do you measure engagement? So if everyone could just quickly do a quick poll for us so we can have a really good understanding. Oh, it's amazing to see the results come in live. Very interesting. Okay, so this is really cool because we've done a lot of research on globally how often organizations are measuring engagement. And it looks like we're probably the mix is about right. So most organizations, I think it's 79%, are still measuring engagement annually. So where we have about 20% that are measuring engagement more than once a year. So really good to just get an understanding of the audience today and where everyone is at with measuring. Okay, lovely. All right, so now I am going to hand over to our wonderful speakers. So Professor Nafu, it would be really great to kick things off today to understand, what exactly is employee engagement and what has been kind of the evolution or the history of employee engagement?
Okay, thank you, Laura. Lovely to share something that I know about. So let's see, I prepared a very brief slides. I just want to show, everybody if I didn't say it clearly. So basically, if I look at the research, actually employee engagement is from practice, which informs scholars and researchers to conduct studies on engagement. If you recall, there are a lot of research on job satisfaction, employee commitment, particularly organization commitment, where employees want to stay in the organization. So this was all done in 1990s. I would say until 2000 and later, and then the researchers started to look at, why this concept is so popular. And so I want to introduce two perspectives. One is US American-based, and the other one is European-based. Before I jump to the next one, I want to show that engagement from practice, actually, there is some, I wouldn't say a confusion, but there's a fundamental difference between the engagement and commitment, because the early on research and also the early on practice, they think even now, people still think that engagement is relationships between employees and organizations. And if you look at William Kahn's definition, so in his 1990 journal articles, look at personal engagement at work. So he said is, people can bring themselves into work, not only just bring themselves physically, but also emotionally, cognitively. And what does that mean? That means that they can, show themselves, their true self at work, which I feel a little bit confusing. If you look at European perspective, which is more clear, is William Shafali and his former PhD student, Arnold Baker. So they define engagement just like a positive, fulfilling, and work-related state of mind that is only characterized by three elements: energy, which is vigor, dedication, absorption. So this is, put things in short, engagement is about the relationship between the people and job. That's why a lot of in the research we look at job engagement rather than organization engagement. So I want to mention that to the point. It's about the person and the job. It's not about the person and organization. So hopefully this gives you an overview what has happened in this field. Later on, I will talk about what we have been researching on the key drivers, what theories we have used to study employee engagement. Is that okay, Laura?
Great. Okay, great. So Neil, I might turn over to you for a minute. So as you know, we had asked our audience members to submit questions to us around engagement. And many of them wanted to know, what are some of the alternatives to the annual survey?
Yeah, it's a great question. So thanks, whoever asked it. I think that there's a few. I think for us, the main driver for this is that, as Niall said, it's hard to measure engagement just through a once-a-year survey. And there's loads of kind of talk around, that moment in time where somebody completes a survey. They might have had a bad day, might have just come out of a really bad one-to-one. So to anchor kind of a whole engagement strategy on a once-a-year survey just isn't really kind of fit for purpose. So when you look at that from that perspective, we've tried to do a number of things at Intercom. We've started to do a monthly ENPS just to try and see whether there's any kind of seasonality impact that, any seasonality things that impact engagement. So for example, we're going into the holiday season. Our customer service teams do a great job of working through the holiday season, doing all great things for our customers. So actually, how does their engagement feel at this time of year versus other parts of the business that may get a nice 2-week break? Or things around kind of sales launches, anything like that actually might affect engagement throughout the year. So you get a bit of a better sense. And then really it's kind of broadening out that thinking around from engagement just being that one slice of an overall kind of org health picture. And when you start, I know we'll probably get onto things like analytics later on, but there's so many other things that you can do to start measuring that kind of engagement piece when you look through the org health lens. So Things like attrition stats are one that we use quite a lot. We use kind of exit data, and also data about why people stay in the organization. It's often really common to look at exit interview data. Why do people leave? But actually, when by proportion, a lot more people stay. So what are the things that are actually keeping people in the business? Looking at things like referral metrics, D&I data, any key talent groups, performance metrics, performance curves. So all of these things kind of just give you one thing in isolation, but actually if you start to kind of layer one over the other, you actually get a really good picture of kind of the overall health of the organization, as opposed to just looking at that kind of once per year survey around engagement. And probably the final thing I'll say there is the one thing we found when we did the once a year engagement survey, because our company is growing and scaling so quickly, it's really, really hard to ever get a true kind of apples to apples comparison. So, you get your survey, and then a year goes by, you get the same survey again, and you look at kind of trends up and down, but actually you're not comparing a true like-for-like data set. So it's really, really hard to then start to use that data to inform any kind of real solid strategy. So it definitely has a place, but for us, it's definitely more part of a broader kind of org health discussion.
That's great. And Neil, when you're doing your pulses, are you using consistent questions that you're asking so you can measure like for like, or how, what's that process kind of look like?
Yeah, so we do the once per year survey, which is pretty common, like a full kind of 50 plus question set. So we do that once a year. And then we actually do a pulse midway through the year, which is the same kind of questions that measure the engagement factor. So the same kind of 5 questions that the whole company gets. But then each team chooses maybe another kind of 5 or 6 questions to add in addition, really anchored on things where they've built action plans around, just to kind of get a sense of whether the action plans are working, or actually do they need to tweak them slightly. So it's definitely not a full survey twice a year, but that pulse is more tailored. Each leader in the organization chooses kind of which questions they ask. Again, because different times of the year sometimes focus on different things. So it's really important you get that kind of really good data set.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Edel, I might go over to you now. So how often and what is the best way to capture feedback to gain a really measurable and holistic view of engagement?
Thanks, Laura. I suppose similar to what Neil said, I think it's dependent on your organisation. So how often totally depends on the type of organisation you are. Like we know millennials are the largest generation in the workforce, and they want an organisation that listens, makes them feel valued. And if you reflect on kind of what the makeup of your organisation is, you'll kind of know whether once a year will be enough. We found that once a year wasn't enough for us, so we've gone with a twice a year survey. And then again, when we drill down, that wasn't enough for some of our teams. So we actually do take a pulse on a quarterly basis with some of those teams. And we found it's quick and easy. It allows us to see trends. We can kind of drill down as needed. And actually, we get the in-the-moment feedback we're looking for across our different locations. And then to kind of make it, I suppose, more valuable and measurable, by having that kind of company-wide piece, we can look at it, get a holistic view of kind of the results for the organization. We can pick out our key focus areas and work towards that. And then from our kind of managers, we like to get them to kind of take the real-time data, host deep dive sessions, and create supportive action plans. Because we know if it's not tracked, it can't be measured. So we're never going to kind of see the improvement. So we work towards kind of looking at what actions we've taken in the quarter and really keep talking about it to make sure we have momentum. So that's kind of the big things for us that kind of really make a difference. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And Edel, I know you and I were just chatting before the webinar, and one of the things that you touched upon that I think probably would really resonate with everyone is that it doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey.
It doesn't. So we've been running our survey since our merger. And it kind of gives people obviously the opportunity. But the first time we launched it, it took a lot of work from the HR side of things to kind of go out, tell people how to use it, how confidential it is, and the benefits of having their say, and kind of creating that culture where people have the opportunity to give feedback and that it's okay to share. And we found over the last couple of runs of our survey that actually the engagement is there from when people, as they want to have their say, they know something's going to happen because they've seen the results, and there's less pushing from the HR teams and kind of bribing, saying come finish our survey. So actually it's now creating that environment where people say, please let me have my opportunity to talk and share, because you'll listen to me and something will happen. And then they'll see that action and build upon it.
Yeah, that's so true. And I know with a lot of the customers that we work with, you know, once they kind of get the results back and the insights, it's like, what do we do now? I think that's the most daunting task of it all. So, so thank you for touching upon that. So now, Neil and Edel touched a little bit on kind of the metrics and the analytics. Maybe you could comment on, you know, what are the key metrics to use to measure and then to build engagement?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Neil and Edel. I really love that, you know, you run the frequency and you do timely feedback. So based on my experience and, you know, in research, in consulting, what I found is that, you know, there is a big gap between research and practice. You know, everybody says that, nobody listens to research. Nobody want to read these very long journal articles. I just want to share, you know, why I really want to focus on the concept of engagement is I want to create a shared understanding, you know, between research and practice. What do we mean by engagement? And as I said earlier on, you know, there are different definitions. And if you look at engagement survey in practice, you can find all sorts of different questions being asked. So here I want to provide two valid sorts of slides and questions. Check this one. And if I want to share, 1 second. I want to share, where is the slides? Anyway, so I want to, there are some valid resources, you know, to share the, to ask the right questions. So I'll give you one example about William Shafali. So he has his own personal website, and he has done this, questions, sets of questions in professionals, in healthcare, in public sector, teachers, and in consulting teams, IT companies. So they have done a lot of research on what are the best questions for engagement. I read a few one. So he has a long version with 17 questions, and he also has a short version with 9 questions only. Remember, we talked about what engagement is. So he and his team categorize it about energy, dedication, absorption. So for measuring energy, he said, okay, these are 3 questions you can use in the survey. At my work, I feel, you know, I'm with a great energy. At my job, I feel strong and vigorous, and I am passionate about my job. So this is about energy. For dedication, he has very short 3 questions. My job inspires me, and when I get up in the morning, I feel like going to work. The last one is I feel happy when I'm working intensively. So just give you this kind of a video that those questions have been validated in a lot of really and in terms of the drivers for engagement, there are also different reasons on that. And I would want to say that it's okay that if you use some questions that are suitable for your company, but you have to make sure your questions being asked are valid, reliable. For example, there should be some consistency in terms of understanding. If I fill in the survey, Laura fill in the survey, Edel fill in the survey, or Neil fill in the survey, we should have some basic shared understanding of the questions. So that's why, you know, that's why how research measure questions. Once the questions are valid, reliable, tested in different contexts, and we continue to use that. I think this is something from practice. So this is some method. Sorry, I couldn't share the slides at the moment, but I can happily to share the slides afterwards.
Yeah, great. We're going to actually be doing a white paper to follow up with that, so we could share that out definitely. That's really good. And I know when we're working with our customers, when it comes to kind of some of the key metrics, some of the really valuable, like rich insights that, you know, that we look at is we often do a lot around demographics as well. So, you know, we can drill down to job role, to, you know, obviously departmental manager, all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, now I can share the questions. So you can all have a look at those questions. This is the long version, and this is short version. And I think you talk about the metrics. We in research, we have to be very, restricted with the terms and the constructs we use. For example, you talk about the metrics. So I believe all of the practice want to find the drivers for engagement, not just how, okay, this is engagement. If you look at people's engagement survey, I can ask Daniel, have you run some trust questions? Have you run some questions about the culture? Have you run some questions about support from manager, from organization? So the whole thing is called engagement survey, but actually in the survey, you have a different elements. So what we are trying to do is get those elements. What are the key drivers for engagement? From William Kahn's 1990 journal, so he mentioned that the metrics, if you want to measure engagement, if you want to understand what drives engagement, so these are three things based on his research. The first one is meaningfulness. So people are doing something important to contribute to organization success. Safety, so people feel safe to bring themselves to work. For example, they have a supportive relationship with the supervisors and peers. And people are given physical and psychological resources they need to finish their work. Although this article was published in 1990s, I believe they still have value, to current work context. One thing I want to mention is about meaningfulness. And so many people talk about the purpose at work, meaningfulness at work. And because in 1990, people more looking into the organization. But if you want to apply this framework into current workforce, you probably think about what the meaningfulness do we mean? Maybe not only for organization success, but also for community or other stakeholders. So I'm just going to share this for now and open to the floor to see what do you think.
Great. Okay. Any comment from Edel and Neil? Looks probably very familiar.
Yeah, I think the one thing that was said was resonated for me was around the shared understanding of the questions and trying to make sure that when somebody's answering the question, everybody's kind of answering the same question. Because people can interpret the questions in many, many different ways. And we've seen that as we've gone around different teams, that actually how people read and interpret the question can be very, very different. So I think that's a really good point to make sure that all the questions are kind of easy to understand and interpret.
Yeah, great. Okay, great. So I think probably one of the biggest challenges we have, is around how to motivate the employees to respond to surveys. And then, we get asked a lot, like, what is a good response rate? So Neil, I'm wondering maybe if you could jump in there and give us a little bit of context around that from your experience.
Yeah. So the response rate, first of all, I mean, if you kind of read many things, it'll say, a good response rate is around kind of 75, 80, I think 90% would be exceptional. Like our response rate typically is over 90% across most of our teams and company average as well. And we're really pleased with that. And I think the reason being that response rate itself can be almost a proxy for engagement. Like Edel said, if people feel that they want to kind of have a voice and share their opinion, then that's really good. And we want people to do that. So I'd definitely make sure people are looking at their response rate. And if it's low in particular pockets or particular teams, perhaps that's something to dig into as well. In terms of the motivation piece, I think I'd probably break that down into three, like before, during, and after the survey. Like before the survey, the timing of it, I think is really important. Survey fatigue is a thing. Companies do loads of surveys. So I think the timing in terms of when you launch the survey is really important. One of the things that we do really well, I think, is, it's launched from, we do a company all hands and our CEO stands up and, announces the fact that we're going to do our company survey. And I think that sends a really, really important message in terms of how important it is. A lot of times I've seen it where it's been this kind of HR thing that's been pushed out from HR and it's another thing. Whereas actually, if it's really important to the entire company, it's really important, I think, to have one of the senior leaders launch that. And to talk about the why. So kind of, why is engagement important to us, or why do we do it in the company? Particularly if you've got new people that have joined, that have come from companies where perhaps we haven't done engagement really well, haven't seen the action come from the survey. So it's really important to kind of hear that. And never hurts to kind of remind people, this is what we heard last time. This is some of the actions that came from it. So people can really kind of join the dots. A lot of times companies move really fast and it's easy to forget actually the amount of change that's happened off the back of the survey. So I think the launch leading up to the survey is really important. Then during the survey, to encourage that participation rate, we intentionally don't keep it open very long. Generally, it's about 7 to 10 days. And I think, you definitely accept within that you're going to miss some people because they might be on vacation. But actually, we found that by it being a really time box thing, there's a week to do it. People tend to do it as soon as it comes into their inbox. If it's open for a month, I've got ages to do that, I'll put it off, and actually it impacts participation rate. So we intentionally keep it quite short. We always encourage managers and leaders to keep it on their agenda when they're having team meetings, making sure that it's really top of mind, and they're always kind of reminding people to do it. You can track response rates. So sometimes, depending, your organization, sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's good to kind of drive that competitiveness in terms of what teams have hit what response rate, but that's very much kind of organizational dependence to whether that's kind of a good thing or not. But so I think for me, it really comes down to that kind of tone from the top. If it's a really important thing for the company, the leaders and the executive team are the ones that kind of really get behind it and really drive it.
That's great. And I know some of the research that we've done with response rates, really interesting that response rates increase by 40% when conducting surveys through a third party, so they're anonymous. So that's another really good probably tip for people that aren't using that anonymous element for it.
Absolutely, I should have said that. Yeah. ours is anonymous, which is maybe why we get that 90%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. No, it's very important. And what's interesting is with some of our customers we've worked with, they would have conducted, the engagement survey internally themselves. And then when they moved to us, surprisingly, when we kind of, map the data over, all the reasons changed. So it just shows you that having that anonymous element to it is really, really critical to get the truth. And sometimes the truths are hard to hear, but really important to get the truth.
Yeah. And, it's really important. And I think one of the things that we do really well as well is that commitment from the exec team. So, it's anonymous, but people have the option to leave comments in the survey, and they make a commitment to read every single comment that goes into that survey. So, that's usually 2,000, 3,000 comments, behind the kind of the questions, and they read every single one, and, making that commitment up front as well. So people know that actually it's not just going to be, because it's anonymous, doesn't necessarily mean that my comment or it's just not going to get heard or seen or read. So
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where, you find the really rich feedback, where, people, obviously you have to use a scale when you're, analyzing and so forth, but then being able to have that rich feedback. And, we ask with our customers kind of like the pros and cons, and we do a bit of a sentiment analysis with that. And it really, you get like a word cloud where you get the words that are repeating, and then you can look at that from the organization as a whole. You can break that down by department. It's really, really insightful. So great. Okay.
Can I say something about?
Yeah, of course.
Can I say something about the response rate? I know everybody's trying to boost the response rate. Of course, the higher, the better. But actually, response rate doesn't mean that the sample is representative. So there's another term called sample representativeness. So even you have a 60% response rate, which seems very high, but you don't know how representative the people answering the survey, filling the survey, compared to the people who didn't. So in what we usually do is that if you can compare the profile, let's say gender, education, or tenure or something, and compare the group who are filling the survey, we call them sample, and to the non-finished group, in terms of gender, age, if there is no difference between the sample group and your rest group, and then even your response rate is 30%, you can, in a larger organization, you can say your sample is representative. So the ideal, I would say, if you have two scenarios, low response rate, high sample representative, which would be better than you have a high response rate, but you don't know the sample representativeness. So I'd say don't just focus on the high response rates. which is the higher the better, but check if the sample who answer the questions, they can be representative of the whole organization. This is very important, I think.
And I think that's really interesting as well, because when you look at kind of best practice and methodology around the pulse survey, often you're not going out to the whole organization. You know, you're taking a sample of, you know, maybe 10 or 20%, 30%, you know, of your employee population to get that kind of, you know, ongoing real-time feedback with the pulse. So that's a really, really good point, because I think a lot of the times, you know, leadership's like, we need to get 100%, we need to get 90%, but you know, you really, really valid point that doesn't necessarily mean you're getting the best insights. So great. Did we lose Edel? Okay. The next question was for her. So I'll wait for her to join again. So Nai, what are the most effective methods to measure and report across diverse employee groups?
How do I say this? What is the best way to, I think I understand, I would interpret your question like, what's the best way to report the findings, right? Mm-hmm. So most research, most report we see is very descriptive. So you look at the mean, you look at the frequency, you know, how many people agreed, how many people disagree. So the percentage. Even within that descriptive, you can, you know, use multi-group analysis to look at marketing function, HR function, or different function, or different units on, you know, the mean value or the frequency. So you can see, okay, this group is more engaged than the other group. Okay, so this is a very deep descriptive analysis. What we talk about analytics, I think Neil mentioned going to talk about analytics later on. So when we talk about analytics, so descriptive analysis only tells you, okay, there seems a story, but they couldn't, descriptive analysis, you know, couldn't tell us what the story is. So that means it requires that if you want to know what is the factor that driving my people working really engagedly in this organization, so they can't tell you if you just descriptive. Oh, they seems high on, you know, workload. They seem low on support. They seem, so this is only our assumptions why people are engaged, why people are not engaged. So only when we can use a predictive analysis, if you have engagement as your outcome, and then we want to understand what the impact of the other factors. Is that about culture? Is that about trust? Is it about the support? Is it about the feedback? So what really contribute to engagement in my organization? So how to report, you have to find out those drivers. If you can run simple regression analysis, that will move the whole field a big step forward. Okay, so back to your question, you know, is that how to best report, you know, within different groups. You can use the descriptive as, you know, what we've been doing now, or if you can use a simple regression based on, you know, the key factors you have found in the survey, and linking them to the outcome of engagement. If you can compare, we call the regression, we call the slope, which is the impact of one factor on the other. If you can report those impact across different groups, different units. For example, in marketing group, maybe the rewards, the impact of rewards, financial rewards on sales will be stronger than other units, right? So, and then you can be able to know, okay, in this group, what are the key drivers for engagement? In other groups, what are the key drivers? And then you can use the different actions for treating groups differently. Because currently, if you run an annual engagement survey, you know, in the whole organization, you aggregate everything together, you ignore all of the differences between the groups. So how to report the best? I think you have to find the most indicators, most important drivers for different groups, not just focus on the mean, the frequency, but focus on what are the key drivers for this group of people.
And I know when you and I were speaking yesterday, we had talked about, you know, understanding what business problem are we trying to solve as well. So maybe you could touch a little bit how that should tie into it.
Absolutely. So a lot of people run an engagement survey and comes to me that now I want to run an engagement survey. And my question is that, okay, what do you, if I can ask, okay, what do you want to know? And then they said, okay, these are the questionnaire. You have a look, give me some comments. But I would ask about why you want to run the engagement survey. And because we are HR, we want to know our people, how our people feel. Actually, this is the biggest challenge for HR, because everything comes from people. Actually, we forgot the big impact of people on business. If you want to buy in the support from senior management teams, Neil said, okay, if a senior management team comes in, promote the survey, response rate is going to be high. But how do you buy in that support? Oh, every other organization is doing it, I want to do it. That's not a good case. So we have to look at what kind of the business issue we are trying to solve here. Is that about productivity? Is it about innovation, creativity, or is that about agility, even agility, right? So you have to look at what your organization needs, what is the business issue there, and then from that business issue, and draw your people issue. How could we make people more engaged to improve productivity, to improve the level of creativity, innovation, or other business issue, I don't know. And then from that on, and then you draw, okay, we run engagement survey. You can say, okay, engagement is very important, but other factors, for example, individual and creativity or other, what are the key factors can drive a business? And then you include those outcomes in your survey design. And then you start looking at what are the key drivers for those 8 people outcomes. So business outcomes, drives the people outcomes. And then when you want to understand the business outcomes, such as example of engagement, and then you look at the key indicators. In terms of the look at the indicator, you say, how do I know? So we emphasize on the evidence-based management. There are 4 important sources for how do you know. For example, you can draw from scientific research, what we have found from research. I'm happy to answer any question if somebody wants to know research. And the other one is your own experience, because you know the context. You know the context better than anybody else. So your own experience and your previous findings, previous findings from your organization survey or something. The last one is your stakeholders. What do they concern? What are their value about? So from them, and then you get those sources of information coming in, and then you form your own hypothesis. Okay, I think based on all of the best available evidence, I think is autonomy, flexible working hours. Those opportunities can drive employee engagement. And those things, and then you start to measure and test your own hypothesis. If your hypothesis is supported from the results, the data, and then you can say, look, the flexible hours is really driving engagement significantly. And then the question is that, how do we encourage people? How do we have a policy in place, practice in place on the flexible working hours? So that's how do you from business outcome to people outcome to the key drivers based on the evidence of best available evidence driving people outcomes, and then test your hypothesis using the data, and then tell a story based on the results. So this is an analytics project, I think.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant and really insightful, because I think, a lot of the times it's, it's like, oh, I need to run this, but why? So it's good to always go back to that business, the business outcome. So that's great. Edel, welcome back. Sorry to temporarily lose you. Yeah. So I have a question for you now that you're back. Yeah. So I think I had mentioned a couple of minutes ago that one of the biggest challenges that we see from our customers is, after they get all the great data and the insights, what do they do next? So I'm just wondering if you maybe could talk a little bit about how you can make the results really actionable.
Yeah, I think it is key to note that you get a lot of information on what you do with it and then how quickly it goes out of date. And as Na said, data is key for everything. You can make better decisions once you have that data. And I think creating a culture that is kind of culture of engagement is key, and you can only do that with feedback, and that feedback comes from employees. So I think when you have that and you reflect on it, you can make those better decisions. So the things we found that were really helpful was, like Matt says, you can go out with the main questions, but you actually need to break it down relevant to teams, because they are set up differently, they have different nuances. And so when you deep dive into those results, asking the team themselves, what can we do? These were your results, this is your dashboard. Why did you say this, or what isn't working here? Give us some ideas, some suggestions on what we can do, and let's put a plan together and really hold each other accountable to it. This is not a HR activity, and I think that's the biggest thing from my point of view. It's teams, it's individuals that have the impact on engagement, and by owning it and actually driving it as employees, I think that's when we kind of build that culture of engagement that will actually make it more actionable and, as I said, measurable, so you can actually see the improvements. And we know companies that are kind of in the top quartile for engagement report higher performance. So the business outcome is in there that Now mentioned, that drives it, that gets the engagement from the top down, but also from the bottom up.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's really good. And Neil, what have you seen as far as a successful way to communicate the results out to leadership, to managers, to employees?
I think the first thing is that resist the temptation to jump straight into solution mode, I think is key. Seen it many times before. You get the results and then, oh my God, like, you know, we need to do something with them, particularly if like kind of scores or particular areas scoring quite low. And as Edel said right at the top, like change takes time, and a lot of these things take time to kind of bed in. So whether you kind of do your action planning now or whether you do it next week, in the long term, it's probably not going to make a huge amount of difference. So it's really important from my perspective to kind of really take that time to really deeply understand the results, particularly, you know, depending on the kind of the framework of the scoring. If, you know, you kind of have this kind of positive response, neutral, negative responses, depending on kind of the makeup of the scoring structure, you know, there's really important kind of things to dig into there. You know, and, you know, it's a kind of a 72% score trending downwards better than a 69% score trending upwards. You know, it's really important to kind of look at those kind of trends over time. Definitely look at things like sample sizes, like Now said, benchmarks, whatever benchmarks you're using, internal, external benchmarks, to really kind of deeply understand that data before you start getting into action planning. And the comments are also good. Like you say, the insights you get from comments are great. But one time that kind of one really, really bad comment or something that's been super vocal in the comment may kind of completely overshadow every other score that you have, and people kind of fixate on this one bad comment per se. So it's important to kind of look at that kind of picture holistically. Then in terms of that said, I think communicating results as soon as you can is good. You know, take the time to understand the data, but make sure it's not too long that the results aren't shared months and months after the survey has happened. Because again, people don't start to think, well, I feel like the survey, actually what's going to happen with the data? I'm not seeing anything coming back. So making sure that shared in a timely way is good. Sequencing can often be really important, you know, so depending on how you structure the company survey, do you do like the company result sharing, then kind of filter that down to team level, or actually do you start at the team and then kind of bubble up to eventually share the company level results? So I'd definitely say kind of think of the sequencing there. And we tend to really bias towards transparency when it comes to kind of sharing the results. You know, what we don't want is people to feel that they've given all this feedback and actually it's then held behind closed door and it's discussed and not kind of shared back. So we really try and play it back as openly as possible and have those conversations around actually digging in and what people, you know, like they'll say, these are your kind of team results and what can we take from them. And then I think the action planning is then the kind of the final piece that we touched on, which is a super important bit. Really deciding at what level can you kind of tackle some of the problems. Some of the problems that come through engagement surveys can be actually quite large and they're company-wide problems. So actually it doesn't make sense for a team to go after those kind of things. So it's really understanding at what kind of altitude that problem exists in the company, and therefore actually what can you influence in terms of change and driving your team. There's that temptation to kind of go after everything. You take your kind of bottom 5, 6, 10 low scoring questions and put action planning around all of them. There's definitely an argument there to say that, you know, you do fewer things well. So what are the kind of 2 or 3 things that you potentially go after and do those really well, as opposed to trying to boil the ocean and tackle every single score that's below a benchmark or trending downwards, and really understanding and talking to your teams about what are the trade-offs. So if we focus on these things, actually it means that potentially we're not going to focus on these things over here, but we think that will have the biggest overall impact on org health or engagement or the way you feel. And there's definitely a version here where the lowest scoring questions may not be actually the ones that would shift the needle most on engagement. So it's really digging in and talking to the teams about actually what they feel strongest about. It might not necessarily be the lowest scoring questions. And then the final couple of things there for me, definite clear owners for actions that you do, whether that's somebody on the team, whether that's one of the leaders or the managers, where you can kind of hold people accountable to keeping these things alive and check on them throughout the year. Action plans are great, but you definitely need to have some kind of success metrics or owners for that. Make sure they're reviewed regularly, and yeah, definitely takes time.
Great, thank you. We just got a really good question that's come in that maybe now you might be the best one to answer this. What's your view, your recommendation on using a 3-point or a 5-point rating scale?
So for that question, I think it's there's no straight answer, because it depends on a lot of things. For example, if my students are doing different projects for companies, I would say go to the questions where they come from, to look at the questions, what originally used. Was it 3, 5, 7? Sometimes could be 6 or 8. So it depends on where the question from, and also depends on the consistency of your survey. So ideally, it's better to have a consistent 5-point all through the survey rather than 3, 5, 7, kind of a mix together. So that's another factor to consider. And also depends on if you are running multinational companies in different countries. So that means that some culture difference. For example, in the collective society, and the people more likely to choose something in the middle all the time. So that's why in that context, we introduce a 6-point. So there's no middle point, right? So, and also you need to look at what you ask. Is about agreement? Is that about frequency? Is about importance? So also you have to consider that into the designing stage. So I'm sorry, I don't have a short answer. If you only have a choice of a 3 or 5, I would recommend 5. But if you have more choices, 6 other points, do consider why you need to adopt those 5, 6, or 8, something like that.
Cool, thank you. We have one more question I might throw at someone on the panel, if that's okay. So there was a question that's come in from Tom, and he was asking what questions you would recommend around well-being. So what type of questions, is that, do you currently, in the surveys that you're doing, do you have kind of a well-being category, or what would you recommend?
We have a well-being question, but it's more around kind of how supported do you feel. It's kind of light touch at the moment, but it's definitely something we're looking to evolve going forward out of our core questioning. So we have a kind of standard questions that we ask every year, and then we have the option to add in a few more. And I think given the market and kind of how things are in the workplace at the moment, it's becoming more prominent. And as Neil said, your org health is key. So we need to start thinking about those. So that's something on our roadmap for next year when we go back out to the market. But at the moment, it's a very high level question of, do you feel that your well-being is looked after by the organisation?
Yeah, we asked a couple. Again, it's probably something that we need to do more on. And I think part of the challenge that we face is that balance between, do you want to evolve your questioning or do you want to keep to benchmarking? And what you tend to find is if you change the wording or the way you shape questions, you then lose the ability to benchmark what you were 12 months ago, 18 months ago, 2 years ago. So it's that kind of real fine balance. So we definitely at the moment anchor towards benchmarking, but I think it's something that we need to change. We ask questions around, can you take time out of work when you need to? Do you think kind of the workload is reasonable, and divided amongst your team to kind of give you that space to focus on kind of mental health and career growth and stuff. But I think it's, as Edel said, I think it's one of these things that is becoming more and more open and people want to share feelings about. So I think we need to probably evolve our questions in that space as well.
Mm-hmm. Again, from my point of view, I want to ask why Tom cares about well-being. Why is that so important for your organization? And if you're working in a manufacturing firm, and of course the physical well-being is very important. If you work in a professional service firm, the emotional well-being, psychological well-being is very important. If you work on other contexts that, financial well-being could be important. Context, I would say, what type of well-being do you mean? Why that is important for your organization and for people? And in terms of how to get the best questions, we'll just share one resource is called Google Scholar. I know a lot of people use Google, but not Google Scholar. So if you Google any constructs, employee well-being, so you can get a lot of articles here. So because in those articles, actually they have a merit, different well-being. If you, let's say, employee health well-being, related to health being, what work characteristics and health and well-being, test model, something. So if you go to the journal, actually you can find what questions have been asked. I'm just randomly look into a paper. I don't want you to read the paper at all, but I want you to read one section is the methodology. So what questions they have asked, right? And then you can go to look. If you look at this model, so they have a look at the different types of well-being, and then if you look at organization climate and different things, and let's see, the well-being must be here, job design, community, job reliability, there are different things, and so basically you can find, you can see here, employee health and well-being. So their health, their psychological health, and their health risk behaviors. I presume this study been done in, kind of a more physical, involves more physical work. And also they didn't include the financial well-being per se. And so those questions you can adopt, you can use in your own survey. Let's say they are also from other sources, to read their overall health from poor to excellent, something like that. I'm sorry if you feel it's really boring, but I would say do not try to create questions yourself. Go to Google Scholar or any other resources. There are a lot of plenty of resources free available for you.
And that's definitely, I know with our customers, we've done all the research kind of in the best practice type of questions, because I think that's something that if you're looking to build it yourself, it's very daunting to think like, what questions do I ask to make sure that I get really insightful outcomes? So thank you for sharing that, Nye. That was brilliant. Okay, so we've got 9 minutes left, and the question I think that we all want to hear your feedback on is the Employee Engagement Annual Survey DED. So maybe we could just do around the panel to get your 2 cents there.
Sure, I'm happy to start. I think no, it's definitely not dead, but I don't think you can use it in isolation. I think you need to have a plan and use other tools available to you. And as we've kind of touched off, it's making sure you're asking the right questions and thinking about those business outcomes. So I think it's definitely alive and kicking, and I think it's been around for so long. There's a reason it's around so long.
Kayla?
Yeah, +1 to that. I don't think it's dead. I think it definitely has a place. I think Edel's right, it's been around for ages. So, I think there's definitely kind of an evolution here that comes with, the amount of things that we can do now around kind of data analytics and how quickly we can respond to these kind of things. I'm sure when it started, it was probably some paper-based survey that took ages to kind of go through the data and do anything with, whereas now we can be so much more responsive with kind of the tools and stuff that you guys do. So I think that's great. So yeah, I think there's definitely a market for it. And, there's so many kind of apps and places that employees can go now to kind of voice frustration and voice concerns if companies don't take this kind of stuff seriously. So I think there's definitely still a place. I think it's just that kind of evolution in terms of how it's done and how it's used.
Great.
What do you think, Laura?
I think you're muted. I think you're muted, Nye.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's
sorry.
her after she answers.
from my point of view, that of course, it's not that, but if you look at the brief history, is that it was, the concept would be have appeared since late 80s, 1990s. So by now would be 30 years. Even by 30 years time, we still haven't found a shared, agreed definition about what we mean by engagement. So there's plenty of work to do on this, about shared understanding what engagement is. Of course, as long as we have a human beings working in the place, and the feelings, the experience of people working in any organization is going to be important for any business. So from that point of view, the engagement cannot be that, can only be, getting more and more attention because people need to be valued. But it's the engagement survey that I would say, if we continue doing what we are doing, that continue the methods you run annually, it just become a tradition and nothing happens. If you keep doing that, I think it's going to be died because the senior management team won't buy in. Why we have to do that? And that if there couldn't show the value added by people, added by HR, and if the people won't buy it, why I keep answering the same question over and over again and without any changes? So I would suggest that the new way, looking forward, how we can do this better, I have 3 points. The first one, again, for all of the HR professional, if HR talks to HR, not interesting at all. So you have to justify why engagement survey is needed for the business, to buy in all of the support, the resources you need to have. And in terms of survey design, and encourage to use the best available evidence from different sources using valid questions, or you can even borrow in the consulting service, and to build a very valid questions. And when employee answer the questions, they say, okay, this question makes sense, they are relevant, and from your point of view, you can use those questions to make better decisions. The last one is that advancing data analysis. So moving from descriptive to the predictive or prescriptive analysis to find the key drivers for employee engagement or any outcomes that you think that could be relevant for the business. And it's not a point, but just say, if you have the results, share them in, timely, and also take some actions. Keep the communication from the beginning to the end, and then continue, which will be helpful for next time you run survey. So this is what I'm saying. If we want to keep it going, I'm sure it will be going, it will be growing, is that we have to do those points.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, for myself, with this survey, it's with the engagement, it's, I think we're seeing a really big disruption and evolution in engagement. So I think it's a really exciting time. There's a lot of new tools that have come into the marketplace. And I think we actually have a lot to learn from customer experience, where it captures things in real time. And, Nai, as you were saying, if we want to get into predictive analytics, you need to be capturing data really timely, so you can kind of preempt and get intervention in before people become disengaged and so forth. So, all right, so we are coming to a close now. 3 minutes left. So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone, the panel and our audience, for joining today and all your great questions. And I really hope you've gotten some really good insights and inspiration to plan your employee engagement in 2020, which is only a couple weeks away. Just so you know, we've recorded this webinar, so it's going to be available online shortly. If there's anything that you felt you missed, so you can go back and you can have a look at it. We're also going to be doing a white paper from this, and we will send it out to everyone who signed up for the webinar. And any of the questions that maybe were submitted, and I think there might have been a couple of questions live that we didn't get to, we'll make sure that we address all those in the white paper. Okay. And also, just to let you know, we're going to be hosting another webinar early next year around how to actually build a pulse survey. So more of the practicalities around how to do it. So with that, I'd like to wish everyone a lovely holiday. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me directly. I'm Laura at talivest.com, pretty easy. So thanks again, everyone. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.